There is a truth about narcissistic people that most people never fully notice, and once you see it clearly, their behavior starts to look very different. On the outside, they may seem strong, polished, charming, confident, and impossible to shake. They can look proud of themselves. They can look calm while hurting others. They can even seem pleased with their own power. That is why many people assume they are happy inside. They assume these people enjoy the damage they cause and move through life untouched by guilt, untouched by fear, and untouched by the emptiness that troubles everyone else. But the deeper reality is far more painful than that. Beneath the image, beneath the show, and beneath the need to appear superior, there is often a private suffering that never really leaves them. They are not as invincible as they appear. In many cases, they are deeply troubled people hiding behind a very polished mask. Even those closest to them often miss this because the suffering is covered so well. It hides under style, control, image, achievement, and constant performance. If you stay with this all the way through, you will begin to see the inner pattern more clearly, and once you see it, it becomes much harder to be fooled by appearances again. This matters, especially if you have ever been confused by someone who seemed powerful one moment and strangely fragile the next. What looks like confidence is not always confidence. What looks like self-love is not always self-love. What looks like strength may actually be a fight against collapse. Keep listening because the first sign is easy to miss, and yet it sits right in the middle of everything they do. When you understand that one hidden piece, the rest starts to make sense very quickly. The first sign is a quiet but constant emptiness living inside them. From the outside, they may look full of certainty. They may speak as if they know exactly who they are. They may act important, proud, and completely sure of their own value. But inside, there is often a hollow space where a steady sense of self should be. This emptiness is not small. It is not temporary. It is not something caused by one bad week or one difficult season. It stays with them. It follows them into silence. It shows up when the room gets quiet. It appears the second attention moves away from them. It becomes loud when no one is praising them, noticing them, or reflecting back the image they want to see. And because that feeling is so painful, they spend huge parts of life trying to escape it from the outside. They chase attention because without it, they start to feel invisible. They chase status because it briefly distracts them from what is happening within. They demand admiration because the moment it fades, they are forced to face that empty space again. This is one reason they rarely feel peace for long. Stillness becomes uncomfortable. Solitude feels almost unbearable. Silence can feel like punishment. Those quiet moments expose the very thing their grand image is trying to hide. So they fill the air, they talk more, they create drama, they move from goal to goal, conflict to conflict, person to person, audience to audience. It can look like ambition, it can look like high energy, it can even look impressive, but often it is a form of escape. They are running from the experience of being alone with themselves, without the performance, without the noise, and without the mask that keeps them going. That is why the outside can look so full, while the inside feels so empty. If you have ever watched someone who could not slow down, who always needed noise, always needed movement, always needed to be the center of the room, you may have seen this pattern without knowing what you were seeing. The activity is not always strength. Sometimes it is fear in motion. Sometimes it is pain dressed up as confidence. They may keep conversations focused on themselves. They may create fresh tension when life becomes calm. They may suddenly chase a new relationship, a new project, or a new victory, right when things should finally feel settled. Why? Because settling down means feeling what is underneath, and what is underneath is often a deep discomfort with the self they are left with when nobody is clapping. Watch that closely. The moment attention disappears, the mood can shift, the glow fades, irritation rises, restlessness appears. They may act bored, dismissive, superior, or demanding, but what sits below that can be a terrible inner flatness they do not know how to manage. They need mirrors, they need reactions, they need an audience, not because they are full inside, but because they are starving inside. That is the painful twist. The person who looks the most self-involved may also be the person least able to sit peacefully with who they are. And because they never learned how to build that peace from within, they depend on the outside world to do the work for them. But the outside world never stays steady enough. Praise fades, looks change, attention moves, people grow tired, circumstances shift, and every time that happens, they are pushed back toward the same emptiness again. Stay with this because the next pattern connects directly to it. Once you see how that inner void works, you can understand why nothing they get ever seems to satisfy them for very long. That endless hunger is not random. It follows a very clear emotional logic, and it causes a different kind of suffering that many people mistake for simple ambition. Another hidden sign is constant dissatisfaction with almost everything they have. From a distance, this can look healthy. It can look like high standards, drive, ambition, and refusal to settle. People may even admire it. They may think, this person just wants more from life. But there is often something much sadder underneath. Many narcissistic people struggle to feel lasting satisfaction. The moment they get what they wanted, the feeling begins to die. The relationship that once looked perfect starts to feel disappointing. The success that seemed so important suddenly feels empty. The person they praised yesterday begins to look ordinary today. The excitement fades fast, and the hunger comes back even faster. This is not always because life keeps failing them. It happens because their inner world cannot hold fulfillment for long. Real satisfaction usually requires something stable inside a person. It requires a grounded self. It requires emotional security. It requires some real connection to who you are. Without that, good things do not land deeply. They slide off. They disappear. So the person keeps wanting more. More attention, more praise, more proof, more status, more admiration, more signs that they matter. Yet no matter how much arrives, it rarely stays enough. That creates a painful kind of inner suffering. From the outside, it can look like motivation, but inside it feels like endless hunger. They achieve and still feel empty. They enter new love and still feel empty. They collect victories and still feel empty. Because looking inward feels too threatening, they usually blame the outside. They tell themselves the next goal will fix it. The next relationship will fix it. The next admirer will fix it. The next public win will finally bring peace. But it never truly does, because the wound was never on the outside. It sits inside, hidden, old, and untouched. And no amount of applause can heal a wound that the person refuses to face. This is why the cycle repeats so often. They idealize something. They pursue it with force. They get it. They feel a short burst of excitement. Then the emptiness starts leaking back in, and suddenly what they wanted no longer feels enough. Then disappointment turns outward. Blame begins, criticism increases. The partner is no longer special enough. The job is beneath them. The friends are boring. The success is too small. The room is not admiring them enough. It can feel confusing to the people around them because nothing seems stable. What they wanted so intensely becomes what they complain about. What they praised becomes what they attack. But if you understand the pattern, it makes painful sense. When someone has no strong internal foundation, they will keep trying to squeeze permanent fulfillment from temporary outside experiences. And when that fails, as it always does, frustration grows. They may become more demanding, more entitled, more restless, more critical, more impossible to please. Not because they are full of joy and want more for fun, but because they are empty and keep reaching for something that cannot be found the way they are trying to find it. This is one of the great tragedies in their lives. They keep searching in places that can never truly repair what is broken within. And the more they search outside, the less they understand the real problem. That is why the pattern can go on for years, even decades. If this is starting to connect with someone you know, keep going. The next part goes even deeper. It explains the exhausting work required to hold up the image they live through every single day. And once you see that burden, their sudden anger, defensiveness, and control start to look less random and much more revealing. At the center of all this is the nonstop labor of maintaining a false self. Many narcissistic people build an image that feels stronger, smarter, more attractive, more successful, more important, and more exceptional than they truly feel inside. This image is not just a role they play now and then. It becomes a whole structure they depend on, and protecting that structure takes enormous energy. Imagine living as if you are always on stage. Imagine never relaxing fully because you are always managing the impression you leave behind. Imagine checking every conversation, every glance, every reaction, every shift in tone, searching for signs that your image might be slipping. That kind of life is exhausting. They pay close attention to how they are seen. They think hard about the effect they have on others. They replay conversations in their minds. They look for evidence that people admire them, envy them, want them, fear them, or need them. They also scan constantly for threat. A small criticism, a raised eyebrow, a lack of praise, someone else getting more attention. These things can hit much harder than they appear to from the outside. Why? Because they are not just protecting pride. They are protecting the structure that keeps them emotionally held together. The false self is not a decoration, it is a survival system. That is why they cannot let themselves be fully known. To be fully known would mean being truly seen, and being truly seen would bring them face to face with parts of themselves they have spent years trying to bury. So they perform, they exaggerate, they control the room, they reshape stories, they demand loyalty. They protect the image with anger, charm, blame, coldness, or manipulation, whatever works fastest. And over time, that pressure builds. It can show up as irritability, as sudden rage, as emotional withdrawal, as harsh judgment, as a suffocating need to stay in charge. Underneath it all is fatigue, deep fatigue. Because living through a false self means you never really get to rest. That is also why even a small criticism can trigger such an extreme reaction. To other people, it may seem minor, even harmless, but to them, it can feel like a direct threat to the entire system holding them together. If someone points out a flaw, questions their version of events, refuses to admire them, or simply stops reflecting back the grand image they need, it may feel far bigger than the situation itself. It can feel like exposure. It can feel like collapse getting closer. It can feel like emotional death. This is why their response may look wildly out of proportion. The anger is not just about the comment. The defensiveness is not just about the moment. They are trying to stop a deeper panic from breaking through. Their arrogance is often misunderstood as genuine superiority, but very often it is compensation. Feeling ordinary is unbearable to them. Feeling average is unbearable. Feeling flawed, limited, or replaceable is unbearable. So grandiosity becomes armor. It is not healthy self-respect. It is protection around a fragile self that never became stable. When that armor cracks, the reaction can be explosive, cold, cruel, or deeply vindictive. What others experience as an overreaction is often a desperate move to keep the inner structure from breaking apart. Keep this in mind the next time you wonder why someone so confident seems so wounded by something so small. The surface story is never the whole story. There is usually a much older fear underneath. And once you understand that fear, another hidden suffering comes into view, one that shapes the way they react to praise, competition, aging, and the success of other people. This next part is easy to recognize once you know what to look for, and it reveals just how haunted they can be by the idea of becoming irrelevant. Beneath the polished image, there is often a deep fear of being forgotten, overlooked, or replaced. This fear can quietly run through their whole life. They need to feel important, not just appreciated, important, special, chosen, exceptional, bigger than ordinary life. For many people, being average may sting a little, but it is survivable. For them, it can feel unbearable. it can feel like disappearing. That is why losing the center of attention is so threatening. That is why another person being praised in front of them can create immediate tension. That is why they may undercut, dismiss, compete with, or quietly attack people who shine too brightly nearby. To most people, another person's success can be celebrated on its own. But for the narcissistic mind, someone else's rise may feel like their own fall. Every compliment given to another person can feel like something taken away from them. Every achievement by someone else can feel like evidence that they are losing value. This is not simple envy. It is deeper than that. It touches identity. It touches survival. If they are not the most admired, then who are they? If they are not being noticed, then do they matter at all? This is the fear they rarely say out loud. And because the fear is so strong, they often stay trapped in silent comparison. They scan the room. They compare status. They compare beauty. They compare power. They compare influence. They compare who is being loved more, watched more, praised more, needed more. And when the answer does not favor them, pain begins. Sometimes it comes out as mockery, sometimes as control, sometimes as distance, sometimes as sudden contempt. But underneath that reaction is dread, deep dread. If you are seeing yourself in this dynamic right now, keep going. The next layer explains why time itself can become one of their greatest enemies and why some of them grow more controlling, bitter, suspicious, or volatile as the years pass. As they age, this fear often grows sharper. Time changes everyone, but for people who depend heavily on outside validation, those changes can feel especially brutal. Beauty shifts, social attention moves, power becomes less secure, influence changes hands. Newer, younger, more energetic people step into the space that once belonged to them so easily. The very sources they used for validation begin to weaken, and when those supports start to fade, the pain they spent years avoiding begins to rise. This is one reason some of them become more controlling as they get older. Some become bitter. Some grow more suspicious. Some become harder to please. Others become emotionally erratic in ways that confuse everyone around them. The outside story may be simple, but the inside story is heavy. Admiration is no longer automatic. Attention is no longer as reliable. The world does not mirror back the same image it once did. And because they never built a strong inner base, they have very little to lean on when that outer support begins to slip. So they may watch younger people rise and feel envy instead of pride. They may watch their influence shrink and feel panic instead of acceptance. They may see life moving forward and experience it as a direct threat to their worth. This is why some become harsher in later years rather than softer. The thing they depended on for emotional survival is changing, and they do not know how to replace it with something more real. Beneath all of that is the same fear that has followed them for years. If they are not extraordinary, then maybe they are nothing. That belief is painful enough on its own, but the deepest suffering may be even sadder than that. Because beyond the hunger, beyond the image, beyond the fear of irrelevance, there is a wound that touches every relationship they have, and it leaves many of them surrounded by people while feeling emotionally alone. Perhaps the most heartbreaking sign is their inability to experience real emotional intimacy. They may have relationships, they may have partners, family, friends, followers, supporters, or people who stay loyal to them for years. On the outside, it may look like they are surrounded by love. But being surrounded is not the same as being connected. Real closeness requires vulnerability. It requires trust. It requires the courage to show fear, insecurity, weakness, sadness, need, and truth. For them, that can feel almost impossible. Letting another person see those fragile hidden parts can feel dangerous. It can feel humiliating. It can feel like handing over a weapon. So they keep those parts locked away. They may talk a lot. They may share stories. They may reveal selected details. They may even appear open at times. But the deepest parts stay guarded behind defenses that are carefully built and tightly controlled. Because of that, they often live in a hidden emotional isolation. Even when people care about them deeply, something remains untouched. Even when they receive attention, the loneliness stays. Even when others love them, the love cannot fully reach them because the real self is not truly being offered. This is a very specific kind of loneliness. Admiration cannot fix it. Control cannot fix it. Possession cannot fix it. Being wanted cannot fix it. It stays there because what is missing is not attention. It is genuine openness. And that is the one thing their defenses resist the most. So they may search for connection in distorted ways. They may seek control over others. They may try to make others dependent. They may demand constant reassurance. They may confuse intensity with intimacy. They may believe that being desired is the same thing as being deeply known, but it is not the same, not even close. And because of that confusion, many of their relationships end up feeling empty to them, no matter how much devotion other people bring. This is where the deepest sadness lives. What they often need most is exactly what they feel least able to accept. Real love asks a person to be seen. Real connection asks a person to be known. It asks for the messy truth, the fear, the hurt, the need, the imperfection, the places that do not look impressive, but to them, exposure can feel like danger instead of safety. Vulnerability can feel like humiliation instead of closeness. So they reach toward intimacy while protecting themselves from it at the very same time. They may mistake admiration for love. They may mistake control for connection. They may mistake being needed for being cherished. They may mistake possession for partnership. But these are substitutes, not the real thing. And because substitutes never satisfy for long, the same emptiness returns. Then blame begins again. The partner failed. The friend was disloyal. The family did not understand. The timing was wrong. The circumstances were unfair. Rarely do they stop and see that the same painful pattern keeps following them from one relationship to the next. The problem is not always the people around them. Very often, it is the emotional barrier within them, the locked inner door they are too afraid to open. And until that door is faced, nothing outside will be enough. Not loyalty, not praise, not beauty, not status, not power, not success. This is why someone can look adored and still live in emotional starvation. This is why someone can seem larger than life and still carry private misery that never fully leaves. If this is helping you make sense of someone in your life, stay with the clarity. It matters. Because understanding this suffering does not mean excusing the harm they cause, but it does help you see the pattern without being hypnotized by the image. When you put all of this together, a different picture appears. The confidence is often covering emptiness. The ambition is often covering dissatisfaction. The pride is often covering fragility. The control is often covering fear. The charm may be covering isolation. That does not erase the pain they cause. It does not make manipulation harmless. It does not turn cruelty into something acceptable, but it does explain why the behavior can feel so confusing. You are not dealing with a person who is simply full of themselves in a shallow way. Very often, you are dealing with a person whose entire identity depends on never touching a deep inner wound. And because of that, they may fight harder for image than for truth, harder for admiration than for peace, harder for control than for love. The outside can still look impressive. That is what makes this so easy to miss. But underneath, there may be exhaustion, loneliness, hunger, fear, and a self that never feels solid enough to rest. Once you understand that, you stop being fooled by the show so easily. You stop mistaking intensity for depth. You stop mistaking grand words for inner strength. You stop believing that power on the surface means peace underneath, and that clarity protects you. It helps you see what is really happening when praise is demanded, when criticism causes rage, when other people's success sparks hostility, and when closeness keeps turning into control. Watch the pattern, not just the performance. That is where the truth lives. And once you see the truth, it becomes much easier to step back, stay grounded, and protect your own emotional well-being without getting pulled into the mask they work so hard to maintain. So the hidden suffering is real, but it stays hidden because the entire system depends on hiding it. The emptiness must be covered. The hunger must be covered. The fear of being ordinary must be covered. The terror of being truly known must be covered. And every layer of covering creates more distance between the image and the real self. That distance becomes a life. It becomes a pattern. it becomes a prison. From the outside, people may see confidence, power, beauty, influence, or control. From the inside, there may be silence they cannot bear, loneliness they cannot admit, and a fragile self they cannot safely face. That is the tragedy. They may spend years chasing the very things that prevent real healing. They may demand from others what they cannot give themselves. They may destroy closeness while claiming to want it. They may push away the truth while insisting they want love. And all the while, the same core pain remains untouched. If you needed a clearer way to understand their behavior, this is it. Not to romanticize it, not to excuse it, but to see it accurately, because accurate seeing is powerful. It breaks confusion. It breaks the spell of appearances. It helps you understand why some people seem so inflated on the surface and so unstable underneath. And once that understanding lands, you can stop asking the wrong question. The wrong question is, why are they never satisfied when they seem to have so much? The better question is, what kind of inner pain makes a person depend so heavily on image, admiration, and control just to hold themselves together? When you ask that, the whole picture changes. And once it changes, you will never look at their behavior in quite the same way again.